Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into something pretty deep, a question about how our minds really change. And I'm not talking about the big, dramatic moments we all remember. No, we're looking at the shifts that are so small, so quiet, they happen almost without us even noticing.
So let's start with this. We all have these stories we tell ourselves about how we've grown, right? We point to that big decision, that new job, a breakup, or some kind of crisis, and we say, that's it. That's the moment everything changed for me. But is that the whole picture? Is that really where our thinking gets its updates?
On one hand, you've got the common belief. These major life events, these clear turning points, are what shape us. And yeah, they make for a great story. But what if? What if the real fundamental updates to how we think are actually happening on a much, much smaller scale? What if they're happening just below the radar of our conscious awareness? Okay, to get a feel for this, let's just observe some of the really subtle things we do every day. Stuff that might feel super familiar. These are the tiny patterns that kind of make up the texture of our modern lives. Just think about these little micro habits for a second. Do you ever find yourself bumping up the speed on videos or podcasts to 1.25x? Or do you consume news in these tiny little bursts, just jumping from one fragment to another? These aren't huge, life-altering decisions, but they're incredibly widespread patterns in how we're all processing information now.
So, if we're all doing this, how do we even begin to understand the impact of all these tiny cumulative shifts? Well, the source material we're looking at today offers a really powerful way to think about this, a new model for change. And this right here gets to the absolute core of the idea. Instead of seeing change as a single point in time, like a decision you made, this way of thinking asks us to see it as a continuous path, a trajectory. It's not about a simple good or bad evaluation, but a gradient, a gradual slope of change. And this brings us to the concept of a cognitive tilt. Imagine you're launching a rocket. If you change its angle by just 1/100th of a degree right at the start, well, over thousands of miles, that tiny, tiny tilt sends it to a completely different destination. That's the idea here, a subtle, almost unnoticeable adjustment in our mental direction that just adds up over time.
This contrast is just so important. A collision is that forceful, often painful update. A crisis that literally forces you to change your thinking. It's abrupt. A tilt, though, that's a whole different animal. It's a gentle, continuous process. It's the slow, quiet update that happens by accumulating all those little processing habits we were just talking about.
Okay, so if we accept this idea of a tilt, how does that change how we see the world? Well, let's use it to reframe a really common complaint about modern life, this idea that our attention spans are just shot.
What if we've been looking at this all wrong? Instead of seeing our fragmented way of consuming media as a failure of attention, what if we see it as a transformation in scale? Maybe our brains aren't breaking. Maybe they're just adapting to a completely different kind of information environment.
What this means is we might be building a new capacity to handle a way higher density of tiny inputs, these micro-interferences. The little notifications, the quick glances at a feed, the split-second shifts in context. And as we do this, we're shifting from following these big, long stories to processing a constant stream of micro-stimuli. And this process, day in and day out, is quietly rewriting our internal operating system. And this brings us to a really crucial point about self-awareness, about how we see ourselves evolving. If the real change is happening in these teeny tiny increments, what does that actually mean for our understanding of who we are? So here it is, the big implication. The most significant updates to how we think might be the very ones we can't tell a story about. We can tell the story of changing a job. We can't really tell the story of the cumulative effect of watching 10,000 videos at 1.25 speed. Those changes, they stay invisible to our storytelling mind. So, with this new lens, we can kind of turn the question inward. And the point isn't to find some final definitive answer. It's more about practicing a new kind of observation, a new awareness of the subtle things that are shaping our minds. So let's end with this. Let's just sit with this question for a moment. Where is your own cognition, the way you think, actually being updated from?
Is your thinking really being shaped by those big, memorable events? The stories you tell yourself and you tell other people about who you are and how you got to be here?
Or is it possible the real change is coming from the quiet, unnoticed tilt of your processing patterns? The speed you watch a video, the way your eyes scan a page, the subtle, daily rhythms of your attention. Maybe those are the silent forces that are slowly and most profoundly changing who you are becoming.